to most Guantanamo people is to have a military commission and lose. After all, Mr. Hicks, who was supposed to be one of the worst of the worst, and supposedly, if Senator Sessions is right, they had the best case they had against him because they tried him first. That man was given effectively a 9-month sentence, sent home to Australia, and will basically be there with his family on New Year's. If he had won his hearing before the military commission, he would have been held as an enemy detainee and returned to Guantanamo indefinitely. The people in Guantanamo who are not even accused of any war crimes, who aren't being identified as people for whom a military commission are appropriate, are much worse off than Mr. Hicks. But I want to add a few other points that my students raised. My students pointed out that if Americans didn't capture these people, who did? And the answer is that the Americans captured 24 people, and of the 517 files available to review, all the rest were turned over by either third parties, Pakistani authorities, Afghan authorities, tribal chiefs, warlords, and all of our evidence for these people begins with the information provided from those sources in exchange for bounties. Now, one of the things that I wanted to show this panel, because I think it goes to the entire weight and truth, is the release in which they simply drop this bounty out, and it says, get wealth and power beyond your dreams, help the anti-Taliban forces, and rid Afghanistan of murderers and terrorists. And nobody objects to that. But if you look at the bottom, it says you can receive millions of dollars.
Would you hold that up for a minute, please?
Yes.
Just, thank you. Thank you.
This is enough money to take care of your family, your village, pay for the rest of your life, pay for livestock and doctors, school books, and housing for all your people. To the best of our knowledge, only 4% of the people who are in Guantanamo could have not been turned over for bounties. I'm not saying everybody was. We can't tell. DOD's data doesn't say. But bounties were paid that were enough to take care of people's whole villages for the rest of their life for people who are detained in Guantanamo. Now, that deals with the first proposition. And I'm very distressed by the fact that so many people keep claiming they were captured on the battlefield shooting at American people. It's simply not true according to what the Department of Defense alleges for each one of these people. But there's another, even more pernicious piece of information that is coming out now, and it has penetrated the halls of Congress, as I've heard here today. And that is the claim that detainees, after release, have returned to the battlefield. I have a couple points I would like to make about that. First of all, if true, that would have a terribly important effect on the CSRT process, because it would be very hard to release people if you knew that was to happen. Judges are tempted by that fear, and everyone else. But a couple crucial facts. One is the Department of Defense, after being pushed from a variety of sources, produced a report. And the report doesn't say what Mr. Senator Sessions says it did. The report says up to 30 people have returned to the fight, and to get to that, they can't identify 15 of them. And of the remaining 15, 3 of them are called the Tipton Three, and the evidence they returned to the fight was that they made a documentary in England called The Road to Guantanamo after they were released. 5 of them are listed as Uyghurs. Now, the Uyghurs are the Chinese nationalists who, in fact, had left China partly because of religious oppression, and we've released them, and they're being held in Albania in a refugee camp. The other 7 that they've identified as having been released from Guantanamo and returned to the fight, 2 of them were never in Guantanamo, which is distressing. And in addition, the remaining 5, 2 of them apparently are still alive. They may have returned to the battlefield, but they're still alive, and that leaves 3. And the Defense Department has said the number is 30. Senator Sessions has said the number is 30. They keep repeating it. And it's a very upsetting thing to learn that our own government, from the Department of Defense, is characterizing the released detainees in that fashion. If I could, I'd like to show one other chart. This chart, and by the way, Senator Joshua, can you lift it higher? This chart is in our report, which I hope will be included with my testimony today. Is that?
It is included.
Okay, thank you. This chart actually shows 2 things. The blue line is the line of statements made by Department of Defense officials about the number of detainees. killed or captured on the battlefield. The red line is the number of detainees killed or captured on the battlefield that the Department of Defense data as of July 2007 identified. And if you'll notice, as late as April of this year, the Deputy General Counsel to the Defense Department came before the Armed Services Committee and stated that up to 30 people had been killed or captured on the battlefield. That statement is simply refuted by everything the DOD's data says. It's simply not true, and it's a very upsetting thing. Now, I know my time is up, but if I could just briefly comment on the effect of this on the CSRT process.
Please.
I apologize.
When you were chairman, you do it your way. In the meantime, the answer is yes, you may.
Okay. The CSRT process is a process that is administered by the military, not under the military judges, not under the Code of Military Justice. What we have in the CSRT process are the senior government officials saying, these are the worst of the worst. They were captured in the battlefield shooting at American people. I think when you look at the record that these people had to review, the record that they had to review made clear that it wasn't true. But when senior officials tell you that everyone there was captured in the battlefield shooting at American troops, and that's false, there's a message there. And when they say the same thing about the return to the battlefield, I think the same message is there. I would love to stop that myth about return to the battlefield. It's a very dangerous and damaging point.
Thank you, Professor Denbo. Admiral Hudson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for holding these hearings. I have a written statement that I, too, would like to have made part of the record.
So ordered.
I feel like I should cede some of my time to Professor Denbo, and I will try to be brief to get us back on track. You know, when I was thinking about what I was going to say here, a phrase I think I learned from my dad was, you know, that you could accomplish something if the future of the free world depended on it. You know, we could rake all the leaves in the front yard today if the future of the free world depended on it. And that was sort of the thought that came to my mind when I was thinking about closing Guantanamo Bay. You know, the President has called for it, the Secretary of Defense has called for it, lots of people had called for that to happen, and we just can't seem to do it. But, you know, we could do it if the future of the free world depended on it. And then it occurred to me that indeed it does depend on it in a very large way. How the United States, the leader of the free world for generations, conducts its business, even its war-fighting business, determines the future of the free world in a very real way. And I think that Guantanamo has become an iconic example of misadventure, and it is absolutely incumbent upon the United States to close it. I have a hard time believing that the generation that won World War II, you know, the so-called greatest generation, couldn't close Guantanamo and figure out what to do with 305 people if the future of the free world depended on it. There are lots of things, and Senator, you demonstrated the ease of doing it with the beds and maximum security. We can close Guantanamo, and for us to pretend that we can't is just pretending. The question isn't so much closing Guantanamo and whether or not we can do it. The question becomes what to do with those people who are in Guantanamo. I was an early and ardent supporter for a long time, too long in retrospect, of military commissions. I was attracted to them from a historical point of view. I thought that having military people involved was a good idea. I thought that the security aspects of it was a good idea. But as been pointed out on other occasions here today, we've tried exactly one person who pled guilty and is now back in Australia, you know, somewhat ironically perhaps, a former kangaroo skinner from Australia. Not the worst of the worst. Not Himmler, not Goering. The comparisons to Nuremberg, I think, are inapt. We need to make a change, and I think the time has long since passed.